thank you very much for all of you attending the Harry Potter James Bond tech session on tech and biodiversity. So everybody who's about to get a coffee, we'll kidnap that person and place it somewhere here so that the person can join us at the tech panel as well. So due to the limited time, I'll start right away. And well, for those of you who are late, my name is Frauke Fischer. Ah.
Please take your seats as we are ready to continue.
Life vests can be found under the seat in front of you. And when opening the overhead luggage compartment, please be careful because items might have shifted. Okay, so yeah, great that you're all here. And I'm very happy to be the host of our tech panel now. Well, first we might ask, okay, why should we have a tech panel? Nature looks back at a research and development period of 4.5 billion years. Nature is, of course, the best carbon sequestration. It is it has always very fancy ideas. Everything works out fine. So why should we talk about tech? Now, after our session, you'll be all very fond of this because you'll get to know some really, really interesting people. So, maybe I just summarize a little bit what we're about to do. Just for those of you who can't remember, we have certain challenges. We need to protect what is still there, the biodiversity and the ecosystem services that are still there. We need to restore what we have lost. We need to somehow, connect to people emotionally, and actually tech is a way to emotionally make people interested in biodiversity. And we somehow have to find fair shares, and the work of my guests today always relates to this. How can we protect what is there? How can we restore what we have destroyed? How can we achieve the fair share? And how can we make people become interested in biodiversity and ecosystem services? So I start from small to large, not in the tallness of the person, in terms of the size of the person, but in terms of the topic they deal with. And I'm very happy to have Kat Bruce here. Please, Kat, join me here. So I announced our panel as the Magician Harry Potter James Bond panel. And Kat is definitely one of the magicians. So she'll be able to pull out from a little vial of water an entire herd of elephants, a school of bluefin tuna, or a pride of lions. And I think this is quite so. It's not only the rabbit out of the hat, it's actually, an entire ecosystem out of a little bit of water, and she'll introduce herself later. Then we have Alex Dehgan. Oh, and I should have said NatureMetrics, of course. Then I'm very happy that Alex Dehgan is here. Alex Dehgan is extremely smart. He did not only train cameras to observe animals, he even trained using AI these cameras and the films to tell him what's on there. And actually the two are, in a way, a very interesting way they are connected, because Kat is working on DNA, and that, of course, has to do with our genome and the genome of all other living things. And Alex figured out how AI observing Florida panther can tell him if they have a genetic problem. So this is, I think, very smart. Then, and he's from Conservation X Labs, I should have said this as well. And then we have Mirko Kovac. I take a seat because that's also... Mirko Kovac from Imperial College of London. He is also very smart. Fortunately, my panelists will introduce themselves because I wasn't able to memorize everything they achieved so far. But he very much impressed me because he had a cover story on Nature, which for a biologist is like the super high standard journal. And Mirko achieved, well, many things, but two which I found very interesting. He observes nature closely, and he told me, well, he works on nature-inspired robotics, which then help to observe nature. So, well, in German we would say the eierlegende Wollmilchsau somehow, so he's has a very interesting circular. And last but not least, Michael Schmidt from biometrio. And we started with very small, with DNA, and now we have a specialist for very, very large. Michael, among other things, is able to watch from outer space into the depth of a forest or an ecosystem. So applying different technology, but remote sensing, for example, to, observe and help us to protect biodiversity. So as I said, it would have given me a hard time to memorize all the impressive CVs of my guests. So I leave it to them to introduce them, because they know each other, or they know themselves much better than I do. So, Kat, please start with your little presentation, if you'd like.
Thank you.
Did you have your presenter? I'll have a photo.
Thank you. How does this work?
eDNA is everywhere.
There we go. Hi. Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for putting together this amazing panel. It's a real privilege to be here in this company. My name's Kat Bruce. I founded NatureMetrics nearly 10 years ago to revolutionize the scale at which we could measure and monitor biodiversity. And 10 years ago, that was like a really niche thing to aim to do. And I remember raising funding for NatureMetrics the first time round, and everyone was like, what? Who's going to pay money to know about nature? It's not important enough to anyone with money. So it's been amazing over the last 10 years to watch nature rise up the agenda, and people realize that actually we don't have anything if we don't have healthy, functioning ecosystems. So the technology that we specialize in is environmental DNA. And really describing whole ecosystems by analyzing traces of DNA that we can pull out of different sources. And today we work with lots of different types of organizations all over the world who, for one reason or another, are needing to measure and monitor changes in the state of nature. So as I think was touched on in one of the previous talks, often when we think of nature, we think of wildlife and the big charismatic species that we all know and love. So much of biodiversity is the small stuff, and it's the small stuff that is running the world. It's making ecosystems function. And we're not going to address the biodiversity crisis if we don't have tools that can also look at changes in those communities. So the amazing thing about environmental DNA is that it can really look right the way across the tree of life. So as you know, as humans go around the world, we're constantly shedding DNA. You touch something, there's a fingerprint, there's DNA in it. You can trace that. Every organism is shedding DNA all the time, and it's accumulating in the environment. So initially, most of the eDNA work was on water. So water is an amazing aggregator of DNA, both from the things living in the water and the things on the land around it. But we can also get DNA from the soil. When we're looking at soil, we're looking at the soil communities, the bacteria, fungi, soil fauna, very much connected to soil health and functioning. For the water, we can just filter the water with a little disc like this. So we talk about this as very high-tech technology, but on the ground it's super low-tech, so it's really accessible. I've gone head-to-head with a 5-year-old, and you can't tell the difference between the data that came from her filter and from mine. So this is something we can put in the hands of anybody, anywhere in the world, to gather data. And from the water, we're often looking at everything, actually, from the microbiome all the way up through invertebrates and the larger fish, mammals, etc. You can get more. We've often found more species from some water samples in rivers than have been found in camera traps in the same place in terms of terrestrial vertebrates. And now we're starting to work with air as well. So we can just filter air, and it turns out DNA is just floating all around us. It really changes the way that you see the world as you move through it. So once you've got those samples, they come back to the lab. We extract the DNA, so you end up with small amounts of colorless liquid, which is mostly what molecular biology deals with. We heat it up, cool it down, spin it with enzymes, and magic happens. And we sequence the DNA that's in. So in the little tube of colorless liquid, you've got the DNA of the whole ecosystem, so everything from the microbes up to the megafauna. We sequence that to read it, turn it into sort of millions of sequences of A's, T's, C's, and G's, and then put it through a computational process to turn those into species identifications and give us a data set which basically tells us which species are in which sample. Now, these data sets can be like thousands of lines long, thousands of species, unbelievably powerful, but quite hard to interpret, and definitely not something you can walk into a boardroom with. So we then translate those into a set of metrics and indicators that can show how different features of that ecosystem are changing and how they compare with each other. So we can look at change over time, we can look at change in one place versus another, we can pull out individual species that are linked to conservation initiatives or that are relevant for livelihoods, etc. And we can tell stories to engage. So we want to use data to inform decision-making on the ground, to engage and inspire the decision makers, and also to ultimately feed into corporate reporting. In order to get to the corporate reporting, we have to go another step further, because actually still this suite of metrics and indicators is too much, it's too complex. So we then have to find ways to aggregate those up into some really simple top-line indicators that can just say, how are we doing? Where are we at? What's our status from 0 to 1 in a way that can be compared and averaged across sites and really summarize where we're at. So, for example, with soil, we're able to take a whole suite of really complex metrics from the soil communities and turn those into a single number that tells us how well we're doing, for example, in meeting our restoration goals. As we get more and more data, machine learning and AI comes into that, so you can take any one sample and place it on a scale from good to bad, and that's where we start to get into really interesting territories with ecosystem condition, soil health, etc. But critically, those can be disaggregated, so you can go back to the full complexity of all of the data, which can be used by the geeky ecologists on the ground who need that data to understand what's happening and why, and make the best decisions to drive the best outcomes. So this is just an incredibly exciting space to be in, and I think there's, we'll find all of us have got technologies that are incredibly complementary, and a lot of what's happening now is about sort of putting those together to get a full spectrum picture of what's going on. But I'll leave the rest to the others in the panel.
Super, thank you very much. I have two. I have two questions which the audience might have as well. The first is, can you detect any species, or is this so far, which I would assume, limited to those that have been there, which genomes have been sequenced already?
So there's a difference between detection and identification. Mm-hmm. So our data sets often, you'll find, you detect everything, and you can say these are all the individual different species, but we might only be able to put species names onto a subset of them. Mm-hmm. So for example, in Europe, we can identify 90% of animal species to species level, and the rest will have an identification to genus or species level. But because you've still got them separated into the species level entities, they can all feed into your metrics and your biodiversity assessments and summaries. When you go to bacteria in the soil, only a tiny proportion of them go to species level, but we're not so interested in what the identities of them are, mostly. We're interested in how that whole community is changing, and how we can learn, without any species names, we can still learn what the typical community in a good quality, healthy, functioning soil looks like, and then we can start to say how far away we are from that.
And my second question is, can you also give information about the abundance of species, or is that a presence-absence data?
Semi-quantitative. So you have to be there's lots of things that influence how much DNA an individual or a given number of organisms give off into the environment, and then things like how close you are to them factors into how much you pick up. So from an individual sample, we basically just say presence-absence. When you've got a good sampling design, you can really see the quantitative trends, and we've done some really nice work with the offshore wind industry, actually, looking at showing the patterns of seasonal abundance in the fish species, and they actually match pretty well. Mm-hmm. It's semi-quantitative.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Alex, now...
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes, okay. Alex, share with us the idea of your company, your approach, and of course a nice video.
Yeah, so maybe just a little bit of a start of an origin story. I'm an evolutionary biologist, also an international lawyer. I served as a diplomat, development officer, and started building USAID's DARPA for development, which was thinking about how do we use technology and innovation to solve global health, food security, a humanitarian response. And I said, why are we not doing this for nature? How do we actually use emerging technology? Because we saw the breakthroughs of what we were trying to do for global health. And I started off essentially as a 9-year-old because I got a book called Extinction Alert. And this book told me about the passenger pigeon. And if you don't really understand the significance of the passenger pigeon, this was a bird that was so numerous in the United States that when it would pass overhead, it would darken the sky for 3 days. And we took that bird from billions of animals to 0. And the impact of our species to be able to do that really drove the sort of line around extinction. And so I've always wanted to say, what can we do? And my co-founder was the chief scientist at X Prize, and the two of us decided to set up Conservation X Labs. And our mission is, how do we actually prevent the 6th mass extinction by addressing the underlying drivers of extinction and using innovation and democratizing frontier tech. So we've really done 2 things. We support the development of nature tech through prizes, challenges, prototyping competitions, foundry models. We've supported 145 breakthroughs with team members from over 70 countries on 6 continents. Invested $12 million, we're an NGO, but invested $12 million of our funding and helped them raise $550 million. And 50% of those companies are still active. We've been around also for about 9.5 years. And so we're really proud of helping build that field. But the other thing is we've been building tech ourselves, where we see white spaces in the innovation space where we can give leverage to other conservationists to be able to solve these problems. And right now, so we sort of see ourselves as like a Bell Labs or a DARPA or a Google X or Xerox PARC, pick your innovation engine, to be able to kind of innovate on innovation itself and be able to develop these technologies. And I think like CAT and NatureMetrics, make them as accessible as possible. So we're really focused around 3 really big bets. The first is scaling up efforts for protecting wildlife and wildlands. We're trying to protect 30% of the world's biodiversity on land and in the oceans by 2030. But there's a conservation funding gap. And for us to be able to close that gap, we have to improve the efficiency. So what we have done is essentially used machine vision, machine learning to take a tool that everyone has, which is conservationists have, which are camera traps. These are motion-activated cameras that take a picture or a video when an animal goes by. And we use something called Edge AI. And all Edge AI means is you're processing locally where the data is collected rather than in the cloud. And that's really important when you're in these very remote places without connectivity. And then you send that information back. So we can look at species, we can look at poachers, we can look at disease, and we can identify behavior. And we've now started to do individuals. So this is from a trip I took this year to Manu National Park in the heart of the Amazon. And you can see in real time, we can identify it as a jaguar. We can identify which jaguar in that forest it is. And as it is moving, identify the behaviors for what it's looking for. And then those notifications are sent back to the users in terms of what they want to use. And that just helps us, right? We're looking at cost savings of anywhere from 10 to 1,000x, depending on the use cases. The real big use case we're working on is invasive species, where if you think about the species that have gone extinct already on the IUCN Red List, they are invasives. They're invasives they're species that have gone extinct because of invasives on islands, right? Islands are laboratories of evolution. They're naive to outside predators. You introduce rats, cats, civets, brown tree snake. This is how we take them out. So as those eradication efforts are going on, being able to identify that particular species, that those have been successful is really critical to protecting that species and preventing extinction in terms of what we're doing. Just very quickly, the other two big bets that we have is really thinking about how do we prevent the Amazon from tipping, and in particular, moving away from economies based on extraction to economies of the future based on regeneration. And the last one, and kind of the last prop I have, is we're really, one of the big problems we had, you all remember the pandemic, right? Or did we all forget it? No one's wearing a mask, so I think we all forget it, right? But the problem is, it's really our misuse of nature that is accelerating the emergence of disease and accelerating the speed at which it's getting to global scale. We right now have Mpox in the Congo. We have highly pathogenic avian influenza. We have something called the orovirus coming out of the Amazon. And so this is a tool that is the equivalent of a molecular lab. A 6-year-old can use it. Everything, it's got 18 months of shelf stability, no refrigeration needed for the assays. It's ruggedized, it works in dusty environments. We've gone skiing and run molecular tests with it. But the key is to do biosurveillance to understand where diseases risk spilling over and look at how conservation can be a global health tool. So these are the three things.
Super. Thank you very much. So I'm very grateful to this new technology because I, as a field biologist, spent so much time looking at boring camera trap pictures where you didn't see anything, and then you thought you saw something, and then you were tired and you missed something. So great that, thankful for that new technology. Now, over to you, Mirko. Well, Mirko is working on a field which I think, I mean, I started to tell you that, well, why do we need tech if we have nature? Nature has this long period of research and development. Nature can do everything. And Mirko, in a way, is working in that field because one of the ecosystem services you might have seen this morning on this chart is that we can learn from nature. Nature has so many smart innovations, and we can somehow learn from it. So that's one thing. Mirko is working on nature-inspired robotics. But yeah, and this somehow matches nicely with what you have just presented, because the camera traps are, well, they are at a certain spot. It's good when you know that a jaguar will pass. Jaguars, as I can tell you as a field biologist, they always like to work on paths, so it's quite easy to figure out where you're going to encounter a jaguar or in Africa a leopard or whatever. And now Mirko's robots, flying robots, bring, well, cameras to areas where usual camera traps won't be found, I assume.
Well, thank you very much. It's my great pleasure being here today. Thank you for being here as well. I think the technology can be improved by looking at nature to understand how technology can work, but we can use technology to understand nature better. And I think it's a two-way dialogue. Now, I believe that technology and robotics can be a positive driver for that. I think robotics is a positive and life-supportive tool that environmental sciences and sustainability can use. I also believe that these robots need to be built for that. So it's not just an application of the robot to use it in the environment, but the design, the conception of the robot and the conception of the question need to be deeply interlinked. So it's a deeply multidisciplinary effort to create those types of robots. I call these robots sustainability robotics vehicles. You can think of them as moving sensors or moving eDNA collection devices. So they go where it's relevant, to collect the data that is relevant. Now, in my laboratory, that's exactly our mission, is to create such sustainability robotics platforms that can measure and modify the environment. So we can think of this as a Swiss Army knife of environmental sensing that has all possible capabilities and do helpful things for environmental scientists, for the whole sustainability community. Now, in the next few slides, I would like to show you a few examples of how this can look like, just from our various robots that we have. And starting with the first one, which is about extreme environments. Now, of course, there was a summer, there was a lot of fire, and there's a lot of danger to the ecosystem because of fire. Now, inspired from that, we built this fire drone that can fly inside of fire. So it's made of aerogel materials that allow it to fly in extreme hot environments. Imagine there is a forest fire, we want to collect data, we want to observe the biodiversity, so we can send a swarm of those drones inside of these extreme environments where humans cannot go or really shouldn't go, and then collect the data, collect the samples, get the insights, coordinate the rescue efforts, and so on. So this fire drone is now going from science to a startup that we are building, and this soon I hope you can buy. Now, the next example is the idea to use drones or flying robots to construct the environments. Now, imagine not just repairing pipeline leaks or damages on buildings, but actually building habitats, building coral reefs, building tree houses for birds, building, even with natural materials, environments that are more healthy, that foster biodiversity. Now, this we have shown here, we call this aerial additive manufacturing, where we showed how flying robots can collectively, in swarms, 3D print from flight. And this they do by stabilizing an extrusion head with a precision of a few millimeters and then extruding materials to build up layers and like this build up larger structures. Okay, so the third science fiction figure here, or example, is the idea that drones are not just being used to collect data or build something, but that even if they remain in the environment, they're not detrimental for the environment. They don't remain there or leave an like an e-waste footprint in the environment. So can we make robots that are biodegradable? Can we make robots that live, die in the environment, and even get reborn? Can we use biological processes, materials, fungi, microorganisms in the process, in the sensing, actuation, and structure of the robot to make them grow again and then operate again in the environment? Now, this is something we are working on, so we call them transient robots. One example is here a drone that shoots one of those transient robots to a tree trunk, like a dart-shooting drone. And like this can place it actually quite precisely with a precision of a few centimeters on a few meter distance. Now, this pod then can have any kind of sensing data and can be used in any kind of environment, as you see here. For example, here we did a study across the biodiversity across the canopy in the forest, where typically you would want to, or you would climb up, place the sensor. But in this example, we were able to shoot these sensors, place them autonomously at lower risk, lower cost, more sensors, much faster, and like this collect environmental information. The example that we use here is biodiversity acoustic signatures, so sound recordings, which we can then analyze using neural networks and get and study the abundance and the species richness in those environments across the canopy structures. Now, it is a tool, it's a method for environmental sensing that is, again, cheaper, faster, at a lower risk. Now, how do we do that? What do we need to build such robots? We need labs, we need students, we need a team, but we also need building infrastructure. And I think this infrastructure is one of the things that is very, very important. What we are building at the moment in Zurich, at the Empa Material Science Institute, where I'm running this laboratory of sustainability robotics, is a test bed for these types of robots. We call it Drone Hub. It has 3 innovation elements: a wall where we can do 3D printing, a biosphere where we can show how these biological processes can be monitored with biodegradable robots, and a facade to show how the robots can be the ecosystem, the immune system of the building, being sensing and actuating agents that protect the man-made as well as the natural environment. So thank you very much to the team, mostly who did all this, and to you for the attention. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mirko. Well, we see here some gender bias, I think. So women have to be more interested in robotics, obviously. So, but we'll discuss this on another occasion. So last but not least, Michael, please. Michael didn't bring any slides, but he brought himself, and he'll give us a little bit of insight in biometrio.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Thank you for inviting me. You might have noticed that I'm the only participant in that panel who was not called smart.
Oh, no. No.
That might be because we've known each other for 20 years, so she really knows a lot.
No.
Anyway, so I'm trying to catch up to the field.
Well, short interruption. Now, the extremely smart Michael.
Goodness, no. So anyway, so what we do basically in Biometrio, we started out in working for the Mexican government in a government position, and we started quantifying nature and assessing the condition of ecosystems for the Mexican governmental reporting. We had then a rather unpleasant president, so we basically kind of had to retire from that country and founded the company in response to that. And we saw a lot of projects in Mexico, specifically in the carbon sector, trying to sell these carbon credits, but also new upcoming biodiversity credits. And as someone in the panel today with London Zoological Society said, one of the components that we can really protect nature and that we can really take it into account in our society, in our economic systems, is really that we are able to quantify what's there. What we can't quantify in our Western society is usually getting lost and not getting considered. So we set out basically using all these technologies that they've mentioned. We've been using NatureMetrics. That came out wrong, sorry. We got a standing MOU. I hope to have soon one with Alex because he's doing great stuff. We produce a lot of camera trap imagery out of our projects, and we are hopefully soon using these robots. We've been actually participating in last year's X Prize Rainforest. Did make it to the semifinals and used the spot robots to go into the forest. So that's the vision, that we really patrol these ecosystems and then we can do an assessment. Currently, we're using mainly that. That's a microphone. It's really quite cool. That tiny part is the microphone. So that has revolutionized really how we collect data in the ecosystem. That's about 15 years when it came out. Before, we used very expensive devices, $2,000 a device. This one is $100. So you can imagine we can now really scale up. And what we do in the company, we use the data they produce, usually species lists, and then we start assessing the condition of the ecosystem according to the species which inhabit it. And Alex already mentioned the invasive problem, which is a major problem. There's this acronym HIPPO, which basically summarizes what the species are threatened by. HIPPO, H is habitat destruction, I is invasives, P is pollution, the other P is population pressure, and the O is over-extraction. So I would actually argue that invasives are probably the main driver of extinction. And we've been talking a lot about today about deforestation, but we haven't talked about ecosystem degradation, which is really the driving force. There's a dear colleague in Stanford, Rodolfo Dirso, you might know him. We've been working a lot with him. We designed the system in Mexico with him. And one of the main phenomena we see is defaunation. We lose a lot of animals. We published a report 2 years ago assessing all our data from 6,000 different places in Mexico, and we could show that 80% of the animal biomass in Mexican ecosystems, this is in ecosystems not in agricultural land, 80% is cows, asses, and goats. So we got a big problem in terms of having reduced that amazing amount of biomass, but on the good side, we also got a lot of solutions in that. What we just need to do is change maybe a little bit our attitude, which is obviously easier said than done, but we're all on it now, and there have been quite a few talks about today about giving species representation, being solidary with species and stuff like that. So we need really to start rethinking. And what we do then at Biometrio, we pull all these data together, connect them with satellite data, and then we use a spatial assessment. And that's also another thing we haven't talked today about space, not in a sense space agency stuff like. So my career literally went through highs and lows. I started in the Congo as a geobotanist, then I went to the German Space Agency, and then I went back to Canabio in Mexico, studying then the animals there with artificial intelligence and stuff like that. We need to connect that, and we need to see our space, our living space, our countries and our continents as interconnected spaces which cannot be occupied only by humans. And we got tools, specifically in Germany, we have this funny tool which is called Raumplanung, spatial planning. We've actually invented it, I think, in Germany. But we are quite underusing it. We are currently just using it to basically design economic areas in cities and stuff like that. So we need to apply that kind of planning process into conservation.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you.
So,
I took a minute more because you didn't call me smart.
yeah, because you didn't bring slides, and because I didn't say you were smart. So, of course, you had to take some extra time to prove that you are smart, which, of course, worked. Okay, so one thing I'd like to ask all of you, and maybe we just take, we start with Kat again, and then take the row, is I think. All your examples pretty well show that your work is, touching people. It makes people become more interested in nature and biodiversity conservation. However, now we need to achieve we have to reach our target somehow, and it's not only that people can sit in front of their computer and watch interesting movies and talk about interesting experiments and say how cool this is. So I know that one aspect you all work on is biodiversity credits, or no, you're not working on biodiversity. Or on helping companies to report, which then eventually might lead into biodiversity credits. So maybe each one of us can give us a brief insight how your work, or how you see the future of biodiversity credits and what your contribution might be, or reporting, if you prefer that.
Well, that's a big question. There's a lot of
we have 10 minutes.
There's a lot of big conversations happening about that at the moment. I think it's sort of a well-known statistic now that there's a $700 billion funding gap for nature in order to turn things around and sort of get the natural world back into the state that we need it at. And so that's not going to come from the usual sources of nature conservation. We need to find new ways to channel new finance into nature through nature-based solutions, through linking the nature and climate agendas, and through a number of different ways. We need new mechanisms. Biodiversity credits is one of several different mechanisms that are being explored and piloted. I'm skeptical personally that the biodiversity credits will sort of work in the same way that carbon credits do, because it's really not clear that there's a market demand for them, and it's not really clear that it's biodiversity is fungible or tradable in the way that you sort of need it to be for credits. So. But whichever sort of financial mechanism you have, you need to be able to set very clear goals and targets and measure progress in meeting them. And so, for us, our work is about enabling that, and we're pretty agnostic to sort of what that financial mechanism is. We're involved in pilots around blue and green bonds, biodiversity credits, and a number of different financial mechanisms.
So, Alex.
I'm so happy you brought up the defaunation and the degradation of ecosystems, because I think this is really the hidden tsunami. And quite frankly, we don't pay any attention to insects and things without backbones. And that's really where the extinction crisis is happening right now, right? For me, if you think about the last 50 years of conservation, in some ways we failed. We failed to bring in other disciplines. We need entrepreneurs, engineers, biomedical engineers, molecular scientists, storytellers, artists to be part of conservation, right? But the other way is we've done a great job of monitoring species to extinction and then writing up their epitaphs as scientific papers. And I like to tell people I'm an extinction scientist, so I'm literally the most depressing person you can invite to dinner. If you really want to depress everyone, I'll bring the skinny polar bear pictures waving slowly goodbye as it's going out on a melting ice cap. The fact is that we haven't focused on the right things. And the right things, I think if you think of it, conservation has been a little stream on the side of the Mississippi. And the Mississippi is the economy, right? And until we change the behavior of companies and help them do it, right, through both voluntary and involuntary transparency, that these kinds of tools provide, much like NatureTrace is doing in the carbon space, I think we have the ability to actually change the reality of what is possible. And it isn't just being punitive, but it's actually to lower the barrier for them to be able to participate, because they're filled with people like us that want to actually bring I think, a positive change. And I want to just ask a question, because I think the other piece is we ask those people who are closest to a problem, who can least afford to deal with the problem and who bear the greatest burden of conservation, to pay all the costs when we have degraded our own ecosystems around the world. How do we change the financing and the economic flows? And there's this awesome chocolate bar.
Really?
I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that.
No, because I have to keep the time. But I can tell you hours about the chocolate. I'll do this later, but not on stage. So.
All right.
But thanks for the advertising.
Giving a call out.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe Michael first, because I know you work on the biodiversity credits.
Actually, yeah, it's one of our quite interests. What we need to do is really establish an alternative land use evaluation system. Currently, we value agricultural products, we value mining, we value all that kind of stuff. That has all prices, but it usually does not consider the destruction of nature. So it could be one option if we were able to, and we will be able, to quantify what's actually there and what is actually doing. So we need to assess what is intact, what is degraded, what is healthy, what is in an integer ecosystem, and when we can do that, we can already build pricing models. If the biodiversity credit, I don't know, it might be a bond, it might be any other kind of financial instruments, but I'm talking to quite a few smart people in the financial industry, from Alliance, for instance, and others, who are quite convinced that this might actually work. So for me, it's a really cool tool, and I get a lot of feedback from people on the ground, Mexico, indigenous peoples in the Amazon, who are quite interested in that tool because they say, you know what, I got my rainforest here, I got the option to slash it to build some palm oil plantation or shit like that, and then I get $5,000 per hectare in revenue out of it, but only after 6 years. What's my option to maintain my rainforest now? So we got a digital tool here, which is possibly changing that. And let's also remember that carbon is not measured. No, it's really amazing that the climate folks have been able to sell this carbon idea to the whole world, and it's approximated through shady technologies, sometimes like forest inventories. I've been working a lot with forest inventories. I can tell you the way you process the data, you can get up to 100% difference in biomass, which is something to chew on. And so it might be one tool to do that, but definitely before we can apply that tool, we need some transparent technology, some transparent metric system or measurement system where we can say, that is there, we want to protect this, or we want to uplift it, we want to increase it, we want to augment it, and we need to measure that. And the hard part here is not extracting which species is currently running around. The hard part is what this assembly of species means actually in the ecosystem context. Now, we heard a lot about the contextual analysis today, and that's really the mission. So if you say, I got my ecosystem, I lifted it up, what does that uplift mean for a company investing in it, like Bosch, like Alliance, or whoever's investing in it? And we need to say, okay, I went up from 10% intactness to 20% intactness, or whatever, and that's really, I think, the holy grail beside all the technology stuff that we're talking about.
Thanks.
No.
So,
and these three guys helps in that.
I have a different last question to you, because I think it's rather easy to find money if you work on robotics. So I'm not discussing biodiversity credits with you, but when we talked before our meeting here, one question you were asking, and which I will ask you now, is how can tech companies and universities contribute positively to biodiversity? So you have 3 minutes to, to save the world. So.
Okay, I think we really need to save the world together.
Can you give me 10 seconds in the end to say something about robotics and deployment?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think robotics is a very good tool for biodiversity measurements, and having tools that are accessible, that are cheap, that are fast, that are low risk is the key, right? If every measurement takes a lot of manpower, costs a lot, I think we are in a bad place. So robotics can help, drones can help, but drones are very polarizing. If you think of drones, what comes to your mind? You know, headlines on the newspapers, in I don't know, all the war zones. So there's a fraction of people that have fear from drones, or people that even don't want technology. It's about going back to nature without technology. And then there are the enthusiasts who love drones, and there's this hype cycle, right? It's all about hype, it's over-expectation. But I think what we need to do is to combine the two and overcome that and create positive use cases. So to work together, use drones in a positive way to protect wildlife, to measure biodiversity, and like this to show the world that technology can help, it can be life supportive. And if you do that, I think then we inspire the hearts of the people who are building drones or who want to build some robot or technology to protect the environment. Because I see this with students a lot, they really want to do good. So can we talk to the good in the heart? What do we need to do that, and then to transform the society through that? So I think focusing on positive, life-supportive use cases together is the key.
Okay, super. So I will be very strict with the timing, because I heard there will be a prize for the moderator who kept the time. So, Maria, I think. I want to win the prize. Oh, cool! A bar of, but I want this chocolate. Great. Okay, so I'll give you. You ask for 10 seconds. I'll give you 10 seconds.
Yeah. So one thing is actually gathering the data and the ecosystems. The other one is actually protecting them, because every hectare on the planet is currently under pressure. Don't be fooled about that. So once we do that, we can do that with humans. We work currently with humans as our data platform, which is obviously not optimal because they don't get anywhere. But then there come these guys around with their drones, and that might actually be a deployment platform where we can actually go into deep in the forest. We got some projects which are 10,000 square kilometers. That's a sixth of Bavaria as a project. So you have to deploy in there, and there I think is a great stuff coming around the corner. So yeah. keep on doing what you're doing.
Yeah, all of you keep on doing what you're doing, I would say. So thank you very much for listening to us. I hope you'll all be very inspired now. Think about what your smartphone can do if you connected with Alex, or your drone when you connect with Mirko or whatever. So when I was a child, I had a Fischer Technik little box where I could do my own experiments. So just, do some experiments and protect nature. Thank you very much.